Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Elevator, where I'm interviewing people who have managed to elevate themselves into extraordinary positions to inspire the rest of us, but also, more importantly, elevate others through what they're doing. And that should also serve as an inspiration to all of us wherever we are and whatever we're doing. So I'm really pleased to have Gopal Patel on today. And well, Gopal, you've been linked now, let me see, associations with the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Council. Look, anything beginning with United Nations gets everyone's attention. There's a lot of people who've got regular jobs who are thinking, wow, I'd like to do something fulfilling and meaningful UN. You're associated with the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. So again, you know, Oxford University, all of that as well. Tell me about the beginnings, which I believe were in the north of England, in Yorkshire. So how does somebody get from Yorkshire to Oxford to the United Nations? You're in Manhattan at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Alpesh. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, I think I share some history with you in that I'm a Patel from Leeds. My parents were, I was born in Leeds and moved down to London, when I was, moved to Luton for a couple of years and then moved to Watford. So by the time I got to Watford with my parents, I was about 3 years old. It's been a long path, and the short version of it is that, you know, I went to university. I went to Oxford Brookes University, which is the real university in Oxford, and well, that's what we like to say.
It's better than Cambridge.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So I went to Oxford Brookes, and then when I was doing my undergrad in computer science, I got connected with the Centre for Hindu Studies there back in 2001. And then after I left Brookes, I kind of went on a bit of a detour. I went to India for a year, did a year in an ashram in India, came back to London, did my master's at King's in humanities, and then did another year in an ashram at the Bhaktivedanta Manor in Watford. So I did about 2 years of ashram life, so to speak. And then when I finished all that, I went back to my friends at Oxford and said, hey, look.
By the way, how was ashram life? For those who are thinking, you know, particularly if they're in the city, a lot of financial people will be watching this thinking, I want to slow down. I want to change gears. This is just killing me, you know. Even if it's not that, even if it's not the push from the city, but the pull. What was ashram life like?
It was fantastic. You know, some of the best years of my life. You know, lifelong friendships were made. But most importantly, ashram life is meant to kind of strip away everything from your life until you just have the bare necessities, right? And when you have just the bare minimums that you need to be happy and healthy, you can actually start working out who you are, what your contribution is to the world, and what makes you happy and what drives you. And so that's why I really value my ashram life. A year in India, a year in London, just stripping away everything, making me realize, okay, I can live with such few material possessions and be really happy and make an impact in the world and help others, right? And so that's kind of driven me in the 10 plus years since I left that life, that I can do so much with so little. And I think that was the biggest lesson that I took from ashram life, in addition to the self-discipline that's needed, you know, to be a monk and to rise early, in addition to living without material possessions, you know, learning how to get along with other people. That's one of the biggest things in the corporate space, right? It's like how to manage interpersonal relationships, how to manage relationships with family and partners and so on. So it really gave it's like a boot camp. It's a good training ground for the rest of your life. And, you know, as we know, traditionally within Hinduism, you know, most young people would go through an ashram brahmachari experience, you know, kind of early on in their life, you know, late teens, early 20s, before they went out into the world of work and got married and so on, because it's that foundation. Just as we go to school and university to get the material skills, the ashram life is really to equip ourselves with the spiritual skills that we need to navigate the world as adults, and, you know, try not to make too much of an impact, try not to make too much of a mess of the world, but try to make a positive impact. Yeah, so that was my ashram life.
Fantastic. Well, I've got a cousin who was in an ashram for, I think, best part of a decade, came out and he's now CEO of a global firm. So you're right in terms of the life skills it gives you, you know, and that ability to communicate, you know, reach an audience. And let's not forget some of the biggest communicators, the best, you know, we think about people like Martin Luther King, that you know, what they learned through their faith, the spirituality, you know, the church, that ability to communicate that faith gives you, meant you could help change the world. So just kicking off from, you know, sort of leaving it from the ashram, then what?
Yeah, so then I started working at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, where I was asked to lead one of their, well, not the one of their only climate and sustainability programs, and I did that, and I've done that for about 10 plus years now, which is connecting Hindu groups and communities and leaders globally with issues around climate change and sustainable development. And that's kind of what brought me here to New York a couple of years ago, which was that there's a real need within the UN space to kind of bring in Hindu values and Hindu spirituality to see what we can contribute to the global concerns we're facing, within the context of the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I lived in England, Oxford, Watford is where my parents are. I lived, in those areas for some time. Then I moved over here to New York. And I've been here now for about 4 or 5 years. And for the last couple of years, I've been engaging quite seriously with the UN on the SDGs. That's a very short
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a very short version. I hope that captured it, though.
Well, look, the UN is an organization of great fascination for people. Tell me more about the Multi-Faith Advisory Council. What has faith got to do with the work of the United Nations?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. The UN is a big beast. I think there's like 47 different agencies or entities within the UN, from like the World Bank is part of the UN, the World Health Organization is part of the UN, UN Women, UN AIDS, UN Environment, UN Development Program, the Global Compact, which is for businesses to engage with the UN. So the UN is a multi-pronged, multifaceted organization. And about a decade or so ago, the UN, a number of colleagues within the UN in different agencies who are working with religion decided to form a task force within the UN. And the task force's goal was to ensure that the UN engaged proactively with religious organizations, right? So that was an internal UN mechanism called the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development. Okay, as you know, Alpesh, the UN is full of fancy words and acronyms, right? So within the UN, you have a task force on religion. And then about 2 years ago, that task force decided that it wanted to create the first ever body of religious advisors to the UN, right? And so if you think the UN this year is celebrating its 75th anniversary, only 2 years ago did it create the first ever group of religious advisors to the UN. Never has that been kind of done before. And so 2 years ago, that group was formed. It's made up of 40 religious organizations and development agencies that work with faith groups, mainly Christians, Christian organizations, but you have Islamic groups there, Jewish groups, Buddhist groups, and 2 Hindu organizations, of which I lead one of them. And so the Multi-Faith Advisory Council was formed 2 years ago. And then about a year ago, well, a little bit less than a year ago, about 9 months ago, I was asked to co-chair the group. And so there's 4 co-chairs. There's me, I'm a Hindu, there's a Muslim, there's a Christian, and there's a Baha'i, so it's very much UN, family of the faiths, family of humanity. And our work is, as the advisory council, to help the UN think through how can the UN engage with religious institutions and organizations to support the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Because in essence, the SDGs are our values framework. And that values framework is that the world should be sustainable. The motto is to leave no one behind, right? So the SDGs in themselves are a value that we're placing on the world, that the world should be sustainable and thriving and joyful for everyone. And what the faiths do is we help the UN think through those values and think through how do you translate those values to all the religious and spiritual communities of the world, right? So if we take something like gender equality, right? That's something that we all agree upon. But how do we take the language of gender equality that the UN uses and translate that to Hindu communities across the world, to Buddhist communities, to Baha'i communities, and so on? So that's the work that the Multi-Faith Advisory Council does, is to help the UN think through and develop policies that are faith-friendly so that the faiths can be involved in these concerns.
And how's the involvement of Hindus within the UN? Are we underrepresented, do you think? Do we have a weak voice? Given that there's virtually 1 billion of us around the world, so right up there with the largest faiths, how does our voice come across? The perception often is that we seem to be very loud in our homes, but maybe not in international institutions.
Yeah, I think from the UN side, I've experienced a strong desire to engage with Hindu actors and voices. they struggle finding those Hindu actors and voices. And so when I've been engaged for about 5 years now, I'm often the only Hindu in the room when there's a UN faith event. Sometimes there's one or two others. But there's a real need, there's an opportunity that at the UN level for Hindu voices to kind of engage, in a much stronger way. There's a mechanism called ECOSOC Association, which is the mechanism through which a non-profit organization can formally associate with the UN. And I think there's about maybe 5 or 6 Hindu organizations that have that, right? And if you look at Christian groups, there's probably tens, if not hundreds. So there's a real need. And it's not because, I think there are various reasons for why there's a lack of representation. I think that's part of the work of our generation, but there's a desperate need from the UN side. And I think there's a desperate need from the Hindu side and from the global side to ensure that there's good, strong, mature, engaged Hindu involvement at the United Nations.
So where's the failing coming from? Is it from our organizations that they don't have adequate speakers to represent the community, or what is the failing? Why aren't more people doing it? More organizations applying for that?
Oh God, how long do you have? It's a good question. I think there's a few reasons. I think one is that the UN came out of the Second World War, right? And so the UN is dominated by the allies, Western liberal democracies, and therefore the religions that are most predominant in those countries, which is mainly Christianity, right? So Christianity has an outsized voice and space in the UN. The Vatican is a recognized observer state along with Palestine, so like Christianity has a big seat at the UN, but it's because Christian nations made the UN and, overwhelmingly call the shots, from the Security Council and all the other bodies as well, right? So I think that's one reason. But I think the bigger reason and the opportunity is that I think within Hindu institutions, both in India and in the diaspora, our focus, Hinduism has never been and I say this with respect to my Christian and Muslim friends, Hinduism has never had a desire to spread to every corner of the world, right? We've never had to build out the institutions and the processes and the management to ensure that every single person in the world has access to Hinduism, right? If you look at the history
of proselytizing, so there's
right. You look at the history of Christianity and Islam, they built out global infrastructure and institutions in order to spread their message, and therefore they have a history of building out thinking in terms of how do you work with all people of the world. For Hindus, that desire is not there, or it's not so pronounced, so it was mainly located to India, then to a few other countries. And in recent history, and I say recent, only in the last 50 to 60, 70 years, has Hinduism been a strong force in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and some other countries as well. And so, although it's one of the oldest traditions in the world, I would say it's one of the least modern traditions in the world, in the sense that it doesn't have modern mechanisms in the way that Christian institutions do and Islamic institutions do and Jewish institutions, right? And so a simple example for why we're not engaging at the UN is because who are the Hindu advocates talking about gender equality? Who are the Hindu academics or leaders who are talking about how to reform our governance or our economic models? Who are the Hindus who are talking about poverty reduction? These are things that the Christians and the Muslim organizations do very well and have been doing for hundreds of years, is to think about these kind of major global concerns, right? And how their respective faiths can address them. For Hindus, we've never really had to think on that scale before. We've never been a global religion until a couple of decades ago, right? So the opportunity there now for Hindus is to think about, okay, I read the Bhagavad Gita, or I read the Ramayana, or I do my puja, or I do my whatever. How does that benefit people of the world? What teachings can I take from the Gita can I use to ensure that women are not discriminated in the workplace, or to ensure that children have a full and healthy education and upbringing, or to ensure that girls are not married off at a young age in India, right? These are the questions that I think Hindu communities globally need to start thinking about. And when they do, they can start engaging with the UN, because the UN is not there just to pat you on the back and say, good job. The UN is there because they want to see new and fresh thinking to address, the concerns of the Sustainable Development Goals. Is it
because partly very often Hindus want to do it through, let's put it this way, the secular channel, so the non-faith-based way, which is fine, because if that delivers results, it delivers results. But of course, that won't necessarily deliver results if you're speaking to an audience which particularly wants to hear a faith-based argument for change, because the secular argument will actually repulse them. So there is this whole Hindu audience, like you said, which you might want to help with change, but unless the message also comes from similar thought leaders, then the change is not going to happen. In actual fact, it might just entrench pre-existing views. Is that? I mean, I'm sort of...
No, I think that's part of it, and the other part of it is that, you know, I think for a lot of Hindus, we do things and we don't call it Hindu, right? We just assume that these are and they are universal values and principles. The understanding that all life is sacred, the understanding that all life is equal, the understanding that we should not cause violence or harm to other people. Like, those aren't Hindu ideas or values, they're universal, right? And so I think for a lot of Hindus, and myself included, I sometimes feel like, no, ahimsa is not a Hindu value, it's a global value, right? It just so happened that the people living in India thousands of years ago came up with this understanding, but it's applicable for all of mankind, right? Or all people. So I think that's part of the challenge as well, that so often, because of the universality of Hinduism, that we don't want to reduce it down to say, okay, this value, it fits into the box of Hinduism, but actually this value or this principle is open and applicable to all people. And I think that's why a lot of Hindus do the work they do in the world through secular organizations, because they don't want to narrow it to say this is only for Hindus and therefore it's not relevant for other people. I think that's another reason.
Yeah. In terms of elevating others, you know, helping others, what are the key areas you're working on? Obviously a massively powerful institution, potentially the United Nations. What are the key things? If I said to you, right, what's on the top of your agenda that you're working on, you think's the most important, what would that be at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are two things that we're working on right now, which I think, which we feel, and it's not just me, it's my organization, it's what we feel are a natural kind of manifestation of Hindu concerns and values in the world, and the potential for impact and significant change. The first is that we're working a lot now on biodiversity. We see the climate change agenda has got a lot of traction and airtime, which is good and important. But the bigger and the more overwhelming concern is that of biodiversity loss, nature loss, collapse of ecosystems. Climate change is a subset of that, but there's a whole nother range of environmental issues that the world is facing. And I think for Hindus, you know, it's a no-brainer that the earth and all of life is sacred, and that we have no right to kind of exploit and overuse natural resources in the natural world. So caring for Mother Earth, Bhumi is the name of our organization, and that name is intentional because we see the earth as a goddess, Mother Earth, Mother Bhumi. So biodiversity is a main thing we're working on. And then the next thing we're working on, and this is to the impact, is we're doing work around the idea of Hindu finance, right? And I'm sure this will be of interest to you, Alpesh, and to your members as well, which is that, you know, if I'm a Hindu and I, you know, don't do certain things, like I may not eat meat, or I may not drink alcohol, or I may not believe in certain things and believe in certain other things, like, how is that reflected in the financial choices I make, right? So am I investing aligned to my Hindu values and principles, right? Are we as a collective, as a community, investing in ways that uplift and support people or nature, or the downtrodden, right? So we're working on a really cutting edge research project and program, which is to build out, we're in very early stages, but it may be a fund, it may be an index, it may be a platform. But it's like, if you're a Hindu investor or a, you know, consumer, or just, you know, Mr. Patel living in Watford, like my father, where and how should I be using my money that's aligned to my Hindu values, but also has a positive return on the world? You know, so it's like, it's ESG, it's principles of, you know, investing, whatever, but through a Hindu lens. And we think that can be really impactful because, you know, Alpesh, you know, the city of London, Wall Street, you know, full of Indians, right? It's like being in mini India sometimes, right? There's immense potential there. There's immense expertise. Let's leverage that. Let's use the values that we've been raised with to make a positive impact. So that's the other thing we're working on as well, is Hindu finance.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because, you know, part of what City Hindus is about is the fact that London is one of the most powerful cities in the world. Finance is one of the most powerful objects for change, good and bad, and why we want city Hindus to be able to make that influence. Sadly, we're beaten by time, but I think there will have been an immense amount of material there that you've given us and information which will get people thinking, how do we connect, like you said, ESG, how do we connect the finance that they're doing in the city to their faith, to organizations such as UN, and to think beyond just, this is my job, this is what I've got to do, got to tick this box, but actually be thought leaders, because we need stronger Hindu voices. If for no other reason, then we need more voices for these good changes that we're trying to bring about in the world, let alone the fact that we don't want to be seen to be silent when there are important things affecting our planet. So, Gopal, thank you very much for all the work that you do. Thank you for all your support to City Hindus Network as well. And we will continue this conversation on City Hindus, and we'll continue this in the city, I'm sure, when things return to greater normality as well, and drive forward and hopefully echo and leverage some of the work that you yourself have been doing and be able to support it. So thank you very much, Gopal, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Alpesh.